crawled into a snowbank to end it all. A Lakota woman pulled me back to living. The rope left a mark that never went away. Not a scar, exactly, more like a shadow the skin carries. You can feel it with your own fingers on a cold morning, a ridge the width of a bootlace, right below the jaw on the left side where the knot rode. I've had a beard since the war and nobody ever asked about it, but I knew it was there. Every single morning I woke up still breathing, I knew it. That winter I was camped in a draw maybe 6 miles off the Powder River, a little south of where the Bozeman Road used to cut through before the army pulled out. That country in January is not hospitable to a man who's lost the will to make fire before dark. I'd been there 11 days. The mule I'd been riding since Laramie had gone lame on me 2 days after I set up that camp, and I'd shot her, which was the right thing to do, and also the thing that finally settled it for me, that shooting a good animal out of mercy was the last useful thing I had left in me. I ate what I could offer the first 2 days. After that, it was hardtack and nothing. I'm going to tell you something about deciding to die that I never told another living soul, not even the woman who pulled me out of it. There's a particular quiet that comes over you. Not peace, exactly. More like the moment just before a door closes, when the sound of the room outside hasn't quite stopped yet. I'd been sitting in that quiet for a week. The whiskey I had was long gone, and I was glad of it because drunk men make poor decisions, and I wanted to make this one clear-eyed. It was a Wednesday. I know because I'd been marking the days on the inside of my bedroll cover with my thumbnail, the way I used to do in the stockade at Andersonville. Old habit. Wednesday, the 14th of January, 1871, I crawled out of that half-fallen wall of snow I'd built against the cutbank, walked maybe 30 yards into the open draw, and lay down on my back in the snow. No dramatics, I just lay down. The sky was the color of a tin cup. I don't know how long I was there before she found me. Long enough that the cold had moved from my feet all the way up past my knees, and I couldn't feel my hands. Long enough that I'd stopped shaking, which is the part people don't tell you. The shaking stops eventually, and then you feel warm, which is not warm at all, which is your body making its peace with the situation. What I heard first was not footsteps. It was the creak of a travois pole dragging over frozen ground, and the soft blow of a horse through its nose. That sound, a horse breathing out on a cold day, I have heard it my whole life, and it is about the most ordinary thing in the world, and it's the last thing I expected to hear. I didn't move, didn't call out. I was past all that. She came around the end of the cutbank on a line-backed buckskin mare, pulling a travois loaded with winter wood, and she stopped about 20 feet from me and looked at me lying there in the snow the way you'd look at something that needed to be figured out before you got any closer. I could see her clearly. The cold had sharpened everything down to edges. She was maybe 40, maybe older. It's hard to tell with Lakota women. They carry their age the way good leather carries years, which is to say it doesn't hide but it doesn't break either. She wore a blanket capote over what I could see was a quilled dress, and her hair was in 2 braids with a strip of red flannel worked into the right one. She had the reins in her left hand, and she sat that horse like she'd been born to it, and she was looking at me like she was making up her mind about something. I thought she'd ride on. Why wouldn't she? A white man lying in the snow in an empty draw was either dead or nearly so, and neither condition was her business. She didn't ride on. She stepped off that mare in one motion, dropped the reins and walked straight to me, not cautious, not timid, just walked. She crouched down next to me and looked at my face, and she put 2 fingers on the side of my neck where the pulse runs. She said something I didn't understand, Lakota, quick and low. Then she said in English that had an accent to it but was clear enough, "You are still here." I didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say. "You will come with me now," she said. Still I didn't answer. She looked at me for a long moment, not angry, not pitying, just looking. Then she said a thing that I've turned over in my head ever since, on 100 mornings when the quiet came back. It is too cold out here for giving up. She didn't wait for me to agree. She went back to her mare, unloaded the travois from the wood, and then she came back and she got me onto the travois. I weigh about 170 pounds and I was limp as a sack of wet grain, and she managed it. I don't know exactly how. I was past helping her. I was past most things. I remember the ground moving under me and the sky above, which was still that tin-cup gray, and I remember her voice ahead of me talking to the mare, not in English, in something low and even, almost like she was singing. Her camp was 2 miles east. A tipi set in a stand of cottonwood along a frozen creek, a small fire, the smell of wood smoke and something cooking. I found out later it was marrow broth. Cracked bones simmered most of the day, which is the best thing I know of for a man whose blood has gone thin. There was a dog that barked once at me and then lay back down. There was a painted elk hide stretched on a frame near the door. She got me inside and got me near the fire, and she pulled my boots off and looked at my feet, frostbit on the toes. She could tell by the color. And she packed them in a kind of moss she had, dry and fine, that she wetted and heated and then wrapped in cloth. She didn't ask me anything for the rest of that day. Not my name, not what I'd been doing out there, not why. She fed me broth a spoonful at a time, which is the right way when a man's stomach has shut down, because too much and you lose it, and I kept it down. I slept. When I woke up it was dark and the fire had been built back up and she was sitting on the other side of it, sewing something by firelight, and for a moment, just a moment, I didn't know where I was, and in that half-second before I remembered, I felt nothing. No weight, no rope shadow, just the fire and the dark and a woman sewing on the other side of it. I have thought about that half-second many times. Then I remembered and the weight came back, but different, lighter, I don't know why. She looked up and saw I was awake and she said, "Hungry?" "No," I said. "Liar," she said, and she ladled out broth. Her name was Winenhaya. She told me that the next morning, the first real conversation we had, that was more than instructions. She'd been widowed 2 winters back. Her husband had been a man of standing in his band, a good man from what she said, taken by something that went through the camp fast and hit the men hardest. She'd had 2 children, both grown and gone to live with relations after the husband died. She'd chosen to stay in this camp alone. That was how she said it, chose, and I believed her because everything about how she moved in that camp said she was exactly where she decided to be. She asked me my name and I told her, Thomas Reeves. She said it back to me once, trying the shape of it. Then she said, "What were you before?" I told her I'd been a soldier. She nodded like that explained something. "And now?" I thought about that. "Nothing much," I said. She looked at me from across the fire in a way that was neither warm nor cold, assessing, like she was reading a track. "That is not true either," she said, and she went back to whatever she was doing, which was mending a break in a bridle. I want to tell you that I was a man of words back then. I was not. I was never much of a talker, even before the war took most of what I had. But I spent 3 weeks in that camp, and in 3 weeks a man will talk whether he plans to or not, because there is something about being alive against your will that loosens things up. I told her about Andersonville, not everything, but enough that she understood the rope shadow, understood why a man who'd survived 1 noose might not see survival as a prize worth keeping. She didn't flinch. She didn't tell me things happened for reasons or that I should be grateful. She just listened, and when I was done she was quiet for a while, and then she said, "Did you tell anyone that before?" "No." "Then you were carrying that by yourself all this time?" "I suppose." She was quiet again. "Then, that is a long time to carry something alone." That's all she said, but the way she said it, not soft, not pitying, just even, just honest, I felt something in my chest move that I did not have a name for, something that had been set wrong for so long I'd stopped noticing it was wrong. My toes healed mostly. I lost a small piece of the end of the littlest toe on the left foot, which you'd only know if you took my boot off, and I don't go around inviting people to do that. The frostbite on my hands healed clean. She knew what she was doing with that moss treatment, her grandmother's medicine, she said, which her grandmother had gotten from her grandmother. There's a whole chain of knowledge in that, stretching back farther than any of us can see, and it saved my hands. I started making myself useful around the camp because there was nothing else to do, and because lying around being saved starts to feel wrong after a while when you're a man who's used to work. I split wood. I repaired a section of the tippy cover that had cracked in the cold. I shot 2 mule deer in the same afternoon about a half-mile down the creek. They were yarding in the cottonwoods, fat from the fall, and it was easy shooting, and I brought them back and I broke them down and hung the meat. She didn't say much about any of it, but one evening when we were sitting after the meal she said, "You are good at the work." "Had a lot of practice," I said. She said, "Not the work, the staying." I thought about that later, the staying. What she meant, I think, was that a lot of men do the work in front of them and disappear from themselves while they're doing it. She meant that I was present to what I was doing, that my hands knew what they were at. I had never thought of it that way before, that staying present to plain work could be a thing a person noticed, could be a thing worth saying. There were nights I didn't sleep. That was not new. I hadn't slept a full night without interruption since before the war. But in that tippy, the not sleeping was different because there was a fire to watch, and the mare staked outside, and the creak of cottonwood branches in the wind. And those things made the dark feel like something that could be waited out rather than something you were trapped inside of. I don't know how to explain that better than that. One night in the 3rd week I woke up at maybe 2 in the morning by the way the fire had burned down, and the cold had come in, and I lay there rebuilding the fire without lighting a lamp because I'd been rebuilding fires in the dark since I was 8 years old. And when I had it going, and the tippy started to warm up, I looked across and she was awake, watching me. "Go back to sleep," I said. "I was not asleep," she said. "You should be." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I heard you. When you were out in the draw, I heard you before I saw you." I didn't understand what she meant at first. "You were breathing," she said. "I heard you breathing." I sat with that. The wind that day had been out of the north, and her camp was downwind from where I'd been lying. A man breathing, barely, in a snowbank. And she had heard it, or maybe felt it, or maybe just known the way people who pay close attention to the world sometimes know things that are past explaining, and she had come. "Why did you stop?" I said. "When you saw me, why didn't you just ride past?" She looked at the fire for a while, then she said, "I thought about it." I almost laughed at that, honest woman. But she said, "I thought this man is not finished," and I was right. "You didn't know that." "No," she said, "but I looked at your face and I thought it." She paused. Was I wrong? I didn't answer right away. I thought about it the way I'd learned in those 3 weeks, to actually think about things rather than just push through them. "I don't know yet," I said. She nodded like that was the right answer. "Then stay until you know." So I stayed. I won't tell you it went fast or that there was some particular day when I felt a thing shift into place. It was slow, more like a river changing course than a door opening. You look up one day and the water is going a different direction, and you try to remember when it turned and you can't. There was a morning in late February when I woke before dawn and lay there and realized I was hungry. Really hungry, the way a man gets when his body has decided to keep going and his gut knows it. I hadn't been properly hungry in a long time. I lay there feeling that hunger and I thought, We talked more as the winter went on. Not always big things. She talked about the country where the game was running, how to read the ice on the creek for thickness, which slopes held the snow longest and which dried out fast. She talked about her husband the way a person talks about someone they loved and lost, which is to say plainly, without trying to make it more or less than it was. She asked me things too, but she had a way of asking that didn't back a man into a corner. She'd ask, and if I answered, good. If I didn't answer, she'd let it go without making a point of it, which meant I answered more often than I probably intended to. One afternoon in early March, she showed me what she'd been carving since before I'd arrived. She'd been working it a little at a time, I'd seen her at it, but I'd thought it was decorative work for something in the camp. It was a door. A proper plank door, in 3 sections she'd shaped from cottonwood, hinged with strips of elk hide and fitted with a wooden pin for a latch. She had a fixed idea in her mind, she said, of building a winter cabin on this spot, not to abandon the tipi, which was better in some ways, but to have walls when the wind came hard off the plateau, when the cold got into your bones and you needed something around you that didn't move. She'd been working that door for 2 months, every plank fitted and smoothed and fitted again. It needs a threshold, she said, showing me where the bottom would sit. The ground is uneven there. I went out and looked at the ground, and then I went and got an adze. She had a few good tools her husband had traded for, and I cut a proper threshold from a piece of post oak I found in the wood pile, shaped it to match the contour of the ground, and set it. The door hung level when we tried it. She swung it open once and pushed it closed once, and the pin dropped into the catch clean. She looked at it for a moment. "Good," she said, and then she looked at me. "You did that well." "It's just a threshold," I said. "It's not," she said. I knew what she meant, same way I'd known what she meant about the staying. A few evenings after that we were outside looking at the stars. It was one of those early March nights where the air is cold, but you can smell spring hiding underneath it, something in the mud under the snow starting to wake up. And she was standing next to me, and our shoulders were almost touching, and she said, out of nowhere, "I did not think I would want anyone here again." I looked at her. She didn't look back right away. She was looking at the sky, at a part of it she knew by name in Lakota that I didn't know. Then she did look at me, and it was the look you give something you've decided about, not tentative, not questioning, just settled. "But I am glad you are here," she said. There's not much more to that exchange. She said it and I heard it, in something that had been wound up tight in me for years, wound tight long before the stockade, before the rope, before any of the particular calamities of my life, loosened by about one turn. It was not a dramatic thing, but you know when a thing is true. I knew. I put my arm around her shoulders and she let me, and we stood there in the cold looking at whatever she was looking at in the sky, and the horse blew air out her nose somewhere behind us in the dark, and that was about the whole of it. About 3 weeks later, I rode into the settlement at Cantonment Reno on the horse she'd lent me. I was going for supplies, flour and salt, and a few tools she wanted, and a man there named Prout, who'd known me in the war, looked at me like he was seeing something he didn't expect. "Reeves," he said, "you look different." "How's that?" I said. He thought about it. "Like you're still here," he said. I bought the flour and the salt and a good draw knife for the cabin work, and I rode back. She was outside when I came in, working on a fresh hide stretched on the frame, and she looked up and watched me come in across the frozen creek and dismount, and she watched me tie the horse and start to unload the supplies, and she didn't say anything right away. Then she said, "You came back." Said I would. She nodded once, not surprised, more like she was confirming something she'd known. Then she went back to the hide work. I built her that cabin over the next 2 months. Spring came and the ground opened up and I got the footings in, cut the logs, fitted the corners, chinked the walls. She worked alongside me on everything she could work on, which was plenty because she was stronger than she looked and not afraid of a thing. The door she'd carved fit the frame the way it should. When we swung it for the first time on the finished wall, it opened easy and closed solid, and the pin dropped true. I have been in many structures in my life. Stockades, barns, dugouts, tents that let in the rain. I have never felt a thing like I felt standing in that cabin with the door closed against the March wind, with her there, and the fire going, and the quiet. Not the other quiet, not the closing door quiet, a different kind altogether. She was standing by the window opening, We hadn't hung the shutter yet, looking out at her cottonwoods, and the light that came through was thin March light, white and clean, and it caught the side of her face, and she was not looking at anything in particular, just looking. I am not a man who says much about what he feels. That has not changed. But I remember thinking, standing there in that cabin I'd built with my own hands on ground she'd chosen, that this was about the farthest thing possible from that snowbank. And that the distance between them, all the distance there was, fit inside this one room. She turned and saw me looking. "What?" she said. "Nothing," I said. She studied me for a moment the way she'd studied me that first day in the draw, like she was reading what was underneath. Then the corner of her mouth moved, just barely. "Come help me with the shutter," she said. So I did. That door she carved is still there. I know because I went back, years later after she was gone. She died in the winter of '84, pneumonia, fast. Went back to see if the cabin was still standing, and it was, or most of it. The roof had come in on one side, but the walls were holding, and the door was still on its hinges, still swung, still latched. The threshold I'd cut was worn smooth in the middle from years of feet going over it. I stood there for a while in what was left of the afternoon light, my hand on the door, feeling the wood she'd worked. There is a kind of grief that is not only sorrow. I don't have a word for it. It has sorrow in it, yes, but also something that is close to gratitude and something that is close to recognition. Like the grief is proof of what was real. I closed the door and I stood outside in the cottonwoods, and the creek was running below me under the ice, which was going soft, and a pair of magpies were arguing about something in the high branches, and I thought about her saying it was too cold out here for giving up. She was right. She was right about most things. I think about the draw sometimes. The tin-cup sky, the way the cold moved up past my knees and the shaking stopped. I think about what another minute might have meant, what riding past might have meant. She didn't ride past. A man could spend his whole life trying to deserve a thing like that. I have been spending mine. And I'll tell you something. Some mornings I put my fingers to that ridge below my jaw. I do it without thinking, the way you touch a scar to remind yourself it healed. And what I feel now is not what I used to feel. Not the weight of all those years carrying everything alone. What I feel is a door, smooth wood, a pin that drops true. And on the other side of it, spring.